George W. Bush was born on July 6, 1946. He was born in New Haven, Connecticut. He was the 46th governor of Texas from 1995 to 2000 and was the 43rd president of the United States of America from 2001 to 2009.
George Bush was inaugurated as the 43rd President of the United States on January 20th, 2001. Shortly after, the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York and on the Pentagon happened on September 11. The day after, on September 12th, the President declared the terrorist attacks as an act of war against the United States, beginning the War on Terror. Osama bin Laden is named as the mastermind of the enemy attacks. On January 8, 2002, George W. Bush passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which required standardized math and reading tests in school. On October 10th of 2002, Congress allows the president to use force against Iraq, and they believe Saddam Hussein is holding weapons of mass destruction. George W. Bush makes the nuclear arms treaty with Russia, promising to reduce their weapons over the next 10 years.
This stuff is in order, because
The Iraq War ends on May 1st, 2003. The terrorist faction that would become known as ISIS began to emerge in 2003. On January 14, 2004, President Bush announces a goal to return humans to the moon by 2020 in preparation for the human exploration of Mars. In August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit, and it had devastating environmental, social, and economic effects. November 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death by hanging. In 2009, President Bush's presidency ends and Barack Obama became the next president.
The election of 2000 was a big misunderstanding because near the end of the election, the votes for George W. Bush and the Democratic candidate Al Gore was so close that the state of Florida had to do a recount because their voting system was apparently extremely complicated for the voters. The US called this the hanging chads because the machines didn't completely take out the chad, which was a piece of the ballots that got punched through. 36 days after the election, the US Supreme Court brought everything to a halt. They announced that the recounts of Florida were violating the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. Because there was no uniform standard for counting all ballots. With Bush becoming president, everybody was saying the electoral machinery was broken. The votes in Florida may have very well been skewed because of the voting card was organized. George W. Bush was the first name listed on the left side of the card, Al Gore being the second. However, the second hole on the card was to vote for Pat Buchanan, the first person listed on the right side of the card. People most likely voted for Pat Buchanan with the intention of voting for Al Gore, but because of the bad design of the voting card, they didn't. This confusion led to George W. Bush getting 25 electoral votes, which in the end allowed him to win instead of Al Gore. Then, in the fall of 2002, Congress passed a reform bill called HAVA, which stands for Help America Vote Act. This bill supplied almost $4 billion to certain individual states to replace all voting machines, train poll workers, and combat fraud. With this reform came a lot of help for voting, but at the same time brought a lot of problems with it. Senator Kit Bond led a Republican force against fraud by requiring ID from first-time voters who registered by mail. With HAVA in effect, Republicans and Democrats found other ways to contradict each other. Republicans were saying that Democrats were hyping stories of voter suppression for their own turnout. Meanwhile, Republicans said that voter suppression is a myth made up by Democrats, that they're only trying to get the minorities fired up. For the next 2 years, almost every state would pass some kind of change or restriction to the voting laws. Because of the Palm Beach County ballot, many people say that the 2000 election was rigged and that Democrat Al Gore should have been president.
Chads are the tiny scored portion of paper ballot that voters punch out using a small stylus to indicate their preference for a candidate. If a Chad is punched completely out of the card, the counting machines register each hole as a vote, but sometimes the tiny pieces of paper stay partially or completely stuck to the ballots, which may make it impossible for the machines to read them. There were lots of Chads in the Florida votes, which led to the recount of thousands of ballots. Chads happened all over the nation because several states used the punch card voting system. The election officials in Florida had to recount by hand more than 400,000 that were cast in Palm Beach County. In January of 2001, the new administration assigned to the Eisenhower Executive Office building discovered that their keyboards were missing the W key. This was a problem because their boss's name is George W. Bush, who often is referred to as just W, so they know which Bush they are talking about, George W. Bush or his dad, who was also president. Soon after the prank was committed, some of the W keys were found and located on top of extremely high door frames. Laura Bush, George's wife, was a strong supporter of women during her time as First Lady, contributing a lot of time and effort to the Heart Truth Foundation, as well as the Susan G. Komen for the Cure. The Heart Truth is a campaign meant to raise awareness of the risk of heart disease in women, and the Susan G. Komen for the Cure is the largest and best funded breast cancer organization in the United States.